Welcome to the Burnout to Abundance series. I am your host, Dr. Grace Sha. Today, I have with me the wonderful Debbie O'Connor, who is an entrepreneurial brand strategist who is involved in multiple businesses. Welcome, Debbie.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. And Debbie, you do multiple things, so I thought I'll let you introduce yourself. If you were meeting someone for the first time, how would you introduce all your different businesses to them?
Yeah, it is a little bit of a challenge. I have a couple. I guess the first business would be White River Design. That's my branding studio. I've had it for over 2 decades now. So yes, I started when I was 5. No, I'm just kidding. I have another business, which is a co-working space. So I get to have all these different people in the space that we work with. It's always interesting, something different going on all the time. And then I have a new startup where I'm actually white labeling some IP that I've developed around brand archetypes, and I'm white labeling that to other creatives who work with branding. So there's a little bit going on in my world at the moment.
Wow, that sounds really busy. So I know that this is a series where I'm interviewing people in my life who are inspiring, but have journeyed from burnout to abundance. So tell me a bit more about burnout, because that can sound a bit stressful having so many businesses, and we know that that may lead to burnout.
Yeah, and look, I will confess, I was diagnosed with burnout in 2019, and it took me probably a good 2 years to get over it. I think that I was lucky in the sense that COVID came along and I had to slow down. I didn't really have a choice. So that was probably the best thing for my recovery, because when I was diagnosed, this was just before the World Health Organization said that burnout was an actual medical symptom, or diagnosis, or whatever they want to call it. Whereas before that, burnout was not considered medical at all. And so it was really hard to get any kind of diagnosis. But I guess my story of burnout started probably about 4 years before I was diagnosed. I had a couple of these different businesses running. I had opened up the co-working space. I'd been working incredibly hard, long hours, high stress. In fact, I'd mortgaged my home to start the business. And that kind of stress was all-consuming. And added to that, I had staff, I had the responsibility of paying wages, getting work coming in, and everything just piled on top of me. And if I look back at the very, very early symptoms, I think some of them were things like fatigue, but not fatigue in the sense that if you have a good night's sleep, you feel better. I could have a good night's sleep and still not feel better. So it was a very deep set fatigue. And so I went to my doctor and I said I was really struggling with this. And because burnout was never, ever something that they would even consider, you know, the doctor, I have thyroid problems. So they said, right, let's just get your thyroid checked. When that seemed normal, they went, right, we'll give you vitamin B12 injections. When that didn't work, you know, start taking like supplements. When that didn't work, they kind of ran out of ideas. And what then happened was that things built on top of each other, because as you know, when it comes to burnout, your level of professional efficacy starts to dwindle. And this is where, as a high functioning person, you are caught in this like a deer in headlights, because you're not used to your professional efficacy being at such a low level. So then you try and work harder because you're trying to almost mask the fact that you do not feel like you're in control. And everything you feel like you're doing doesn't feel like you're getting you anywhere. So it's like a hamster on a you know, a wheel type of feeling. So it becomes incredibly overwhelming. And you know, I started finding I've always been a very positive person. And I mean, who doesn't wear pom-pom earrings and it's not positive, right? But this is the thing. I've always been really positive, but I was starting to become very negative. My thoughts were negative. A situation would be proposed to me, and instead of normally seeing the positive, I would start seeing all the negative things, all the things that could go wrong, instead of all the things that would go right. And this almost was a personality change for me. And so people around me started noticing that. And I also found that the other thing that was happening was my temper became a lot short. Like, I was very short-tempered. And I would start to snap at people about things that really were not even worth snapping about. And I could feel it in myself, yet I couldn't control a lot of those emotions. And so this started happening slowly, just chipping away at me year after year. And it was only after about 4 years, I hit rock bottom. And it felt like I had a nervous breakdown. And I went to my doctor and I just said, look, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me. I was very teary. And she got me to fill in like a mental health evaluation. And she said, look, you should probably go and see a psychologist. So I was like, great, let me do this, because I need help. And we'd been through all the other physical things that she thought it could have been. So I went to the psychologist and I was explaining what I was going through. And she sat there and she tried to put me in a box of being depressed. And she said, you're depressed. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think I'm depressed, because I still wake up every day. I get out of bed. I can function. I will, at the end of the day, I'll still have a shower. I look after myself. I do all of the things that depressed people often don't do, because they just can't do it. And I was like, that did not feel right. And then my husband read an article on LinkedIn, and it was all about burnout. And he then sent it through to me and he said, Deb, I think this is you. Look at these symptoms. Look at what they're writing about. And I read this article and I finally felt that someone had seen me. Like everything they were writing about just seemed to make so much sense. And interestingly enough, a lady that I'd worked with many, many years ago, I'd done her branding. She had written an article for a networking group that I was part of. And that article ended up in my inbox the very next day. And it was talking about burnout. And she lives just up the road from me. So I got in contact and I said, look, can you meet me for a coffee? Because I think this is my situation. And we met for a coffee. And I explained about the psychologist. And she said, oh, the psychologist wants to tell you you're depressed. And I said, yes, that's exactly it. And she went through a whole bunch of things with me. And I just went, you understand where I'm coming from. I think I have clinical burnout. We're not talking about just, I hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, I'm burnt out. But this is like a clinical medical burnout. It is all consuming, and it just affects your whole life. But the interesting thing is with this, what I've learned since, is that burnout, you can't get burnout from your regular life. It really is career based. It's your profession. It's the work you do. Because on weekends, I would be okay on weekends. I was fine. I had more of an interest in life and joie de vivre, and everything changed on weekends. So I was still exhausted, don't get me wrong. And there were still those things, but I was just felt like a very different person when I wasn't working. So it's been quite a process. And I've now been, I've been fine now, probably recovered for about 1.5 years. But I had to do a lot of things. I had to make a lot of changes. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. I love how you pretty much went through the whole definition of burnout and all the symptoms. For those who are watching who haven't read up about it before, the WHO did put out in 2019, so unlucky for Debbie, but lucky for us now, like the definition of burnout is chronic occupational stress. And it's characterized by what Debbie said, cynicism or negativity, fatigue or tiredness, and then professional inefficacy or, lack of motivation and drive in your work. And it's actually not a mental health condition, but a syndrome, which is a collection of symptoms. So that's what Debbie was describing, how, none of the physical medical diagnosis sort of fit, and none of the severe mental health conditions fit either, but there's a lot of obviously overlapping symptoms, but yeah, I agree. Like when I was going through burnout, people think you're anxious or you're depressed or you have bipolar because you're acting out of character, but actually it's not, because people who actually have those things, they can't control themselves and they can't be happy again when there's happy things happening. Whereas when you're burnt out, you can still react normally to those things, but you just have so much overwhelming stress that it's making you a different person. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Debbie. And so you said you did a lot of things about it. So how did you go about it once you realized what you actually had?
Yeah, look, I was very lucky. I was able to work with this lady who works to get people back to work, and she's dealt with. She'd been working with people with burnout for over a decade. So even though it wasn't seen as a medical symptom, she had actually been working with people for a very long time. And I did a 12-week program with her, and slowly we put measures in place. So when I started working with her, my days felt like I was wading through concrete. Everything felt heavy. Trying to make a decision on anything became so overwhelming. So in the end, there were things like, she said, we need to try and remove decision-making as much as we possibly can. Now, when you run a business, that's impossible to do, right? So we put those measures in place with other things in my life. So for example, I stopped just figuring out what I was going to do for dinner, and I'd get HelloFresh, which is your food delivered to you, which had all the ingredients right there. So I didn't have to make a decision. I would pretty much order what meals, and in fact, I'd say to the family, you pick the meals, that's what I'll order. And then when it comes to dinner for that night, you guys decide what you want to eat. We've got these dishes. So I didn't have to make those decisions. So that took pressure out. So there were lots of little decisions like that. Things like going to the gym. So I was told that I had to stop high activity, like anything that would get my adrenaline pumping, because my adrenals were so fatigued. So I'd have to do things like yoga and more mindfulness, which was a big change as well, because I used to do a lot of CrossFit and HIIT and that kind of stuff, which, get your heart pumping and racing. So I'd had to swap this for long walks and going to yoga. And so to take the decision out of that as well, I would sign up for particular classes and it would go into my diary. And so it was just seen as another appointment, which meant my decision was taken out of my head. It's like, well, this is where you need to be at 5:30, right? So it was little things like that that helped me just alleviate the pressure to make sure that I still did all these things that I needed to do, that I wanted to do. I mean, my family still had to eat, right? So I couldn't stop cooking completely. But just taking that kind of pressure out. A big thing that I did was I stopped drinking alcohol completely. So no alcohol whatsoever. Also, when it came to caffeine, I dropped down to 1 cup of coffee a day, and all my tea changed to herbal tea. So that was another big thing, is to remove that level of caffeine that I had before, and alcohol. And then I had a complete sleep routine that we really manufactured the sleep routine, which I still use to this day. And so one of those things is I have a tea from T2. It's called Sleep Tight. Because what I didn't realize is how much caffeine is actually in tea. And so, of an evening, I'd have a cup of tea thinking that that was a better option, but there was actually still quite a lot of caffeine there. So I'd have a sleep tight tea. I would have a shower before bed, which would relax me as well. And then I would read for 10 to 15 minutes every night. I did take sleeping pills because the doctor said, look, we do need to help you sleep. But I chose to have sleeping pills that are natural as well. And over time, I weaned myself off those. So, I'd halve the pill and then quarter it. I also had particular spray I would spray on my pillow. So really calming, chamomile, anything that was really calming, lavender, I would spray on my pillow. So that became like a routine that I did religiously for 2 years. And so now it's just part of what I do. So there were a lot of things that I had to change. The next thing that I did was around work. And so basically the clinician had said to me, you need to give up work for 6 months. And I'm like, I can't do that. Yeah. I've got 2 businesses, I've got staff. I mean, this is stressful. So what I did was during our team planning, I do quarterly team planning with my team. I actually got the clinician to come in and explain to them what burnout is and how they can identify when things were triggering me. And instead of saying, because I'd hear people say often, are you okay? Are you okay? And every time someone said that, I'm like really irritated, going, yes, I'm fine. Why do you keep saying I'm okay? And I've been this crazy woman. But the thing is, like, just them saying, are you okay, actually was more of a trigger than being helpful, right? So she said to them, look, when you see Debbie's getting overwhelmed or stressed about something, just go and make a cup of tea and just bring her a cup of tea, put it in front of her, because it's a really kind gesture, but it's their way of saying, I see you and I can see you are struggling right now. And maybe take 5 minutes, have a cup of tea, and then get back to what you were doing. And it was a really good way of making me aware of my behavior, but a very subtle way for them to say, okay, we can see you're freaking out, and here's the cup of tea. But they didn't have to say the words. They simply did an action. And that was really helpful. The other thing, there were so many things. So this is the thing, as I said, there were lots of things that I changed. The other thing was the clinician gave me a jar with 10 stones in it. And every time I felt my energy deplete, I would have to take a stone out of the jar, right? And so there were certain days where I'd be at work for an hour and already 5 stones were out of the jar because of things that were hitting me. And what she said to me was, when all the stones are out of the jar, you have to go home. You're done for the day. So if all of the stones were out of the jar by 11 o'clock, my team would say, you need to go home. And so having them have my back and understand, before them understanding what burnout was, there was just this sense, well, this is what I took on board. Whether it was reality or not is a different thing. But I saw it as judgment. But with them seeing, and something would happen, and they'd look at me and they'd say, I think you should take a stone out of the jar. So they were even aware of this happening. And then I also dropped down to working 4 days a week. So as you can hear, there were lots of things that I put in place. Admittedly, COVID then came along, and I had to, another really big thing I did was in my branding studio, we used to build and maintain and host websites. And we found out that was a major, major stressor for me. So I separated my business and I sold off that part of my business, which was such a relief when that happened, that it took a huge amount of pressure off. So there were lots of little things, but that was probably the biggest major thing that I did to really identify what that, and that was a really interesting process doing that, but identifying what that key trigger was in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So, there's a lot that you've shared there, lots of nuggets. And I thought it was so wonderful that you have a team that actually backed you and supported you and kept you accountable, because that's actually what I talk about in my books and my talk as well, how burnout prevention is not just an individual game. It's not about you going home and meditating and, you know, trying to relax by yourself, but it's a team culture sort of thing. It's a workplace culture you have to change, and being able to communicate openly and transparently and vulnerably with your team and supporting each other to do better together. So yeah, I think that's a real blessing that you were able to do that and bring people in to educate your team even before burnout was a big talked about subject. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
think that's the thing. When you're the leader, you feel like you cannot show that vulnerability. You can't show that you're struggling. But sometimes stepping into that, and that's why when we did the team training, I didn't tell them about burnout. I got the professional to come in and let them know what I was going through. And they totally identified. They could see it. They could feel it. And so I think that sometimes as the leader, you kind of go, well, I can't let anybody know that I'm struggling. But sometimes you have to trust your team. You have to trust your people that they'll have your back.
Yeah, and that's so wonderful. So leading from that, what are some of the blessings that have come out from your burnout, or big lessons that you've learned? Because I feel like we never go through any painful experiences without some positives coming out from it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was realizing that my team did have my back. That, you know, it's very hard. I find it hard to ask for help. I know a lot of other women particularly everyone finds it hard to ask for help often. And so going through that process and realizing when I did ask for help, there were people that were more than willing to help. So I'm now more open to actually asking for help, which is a big change. Another great positive, which is so simple, is that I now get to read so many books. I used to love reading, and then I stopped reading because of kids and work, and now I read books again, which I just absolutely love. So there have been a lot of positive. Obviously, giving up alcohol, that has been a massive positive. But I think now as well, I'm very, very aware of what's happening to me and stressful environments, and what I'm prepared to accept and what I'm not prepared to accept. And I draw a line in the sand very much quicker than I ever used to. I'm learning to say no better. You know, that's a hard thing as well. I'm a people pleaser, so I want to say yes to everything. But I have learned how to say no, and that's been a really good positive as well. So there have definitely been positives out of it.
No, so good to hear. And thank you for saying yes to this interview, because I really enjoyed all the things that you've shared. So what are you doing now with your life, or what preventive strategies that you really stick to make sure that you don't burn out again?
Yeah, so the sleep pattern, that whole sleep ritual, I still do that all the time. Look, I might fall down every now and then. I must admit, I do have a little cocktail every now and then as well, if we've got a celebration that we're having. So I think I'm able to go back and enjoy life a little bit more, which is what it's all about, right? Like, I always say with my team, we don't talk about work-life balance. We talk about life-work balance, because life has to come first. You know, work is secondary. And so the life part of it is now a very, very key focus for everything that I'm doing, both for myself as well as for my team as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because it's all about like why you're doing what you're doing, right? If you don't know what you're trying to achieve from all your hard work, then there is no point to all the things that are causing you stress and burnout. So yeah, it's great to prioritize the life part first. And what are top 3 tips that you can give to someone who's listening who might be struggling right now about how to prevent burnout?
Yeah, number one, the biggest tip is to go to your doctor, tell them the symptoms, and really ask them about burnout. Because the reality is they're probably going to go more for physical symptoms, like how do we solve this physical symptom, you know? So really talk to them about the fact that you think it could be burnout because of your professional stress that you're going through. The second thing is really don't be afraid to talk about it and to ask for help. You will be astounded as to how many people have gone through burnout or are going through burnout. It's crazy. It's also almost become a pandemic in itself. And we need to be kinder to people, which brings me to my third one, is you need to look out for the people around you and be kind to those people, because you don't know what they're going through. And if you see somebody really struggling, like, just help them. I know we've got this whole "are you okay?" but it's a real thing. And by talking, and this is the reason why I said yes, is because by talking about this and letting other people know that you're not alone, like other people have been through it. And I mean, I've come out the other end. So it's possible to do. It doesn't have to be a death sentence. It doesn't have to be the end. It's definitely something that you can work through, but you need to 100% get help to do it. You can't do it alone.
Yeah, I love all of your takeaways. Those resonate so much to what I talk about, like early recognition and preventive strategies. And yeah, having these sort of conversations that people can admit to the fact that they might feel they're struggling. And, you know, as you said, you were just feeling stressed at the beginning, but 4 years later, you know, you were having like a nervous breakdown, and we don't need to get to that point, or to the point where people are needing to take time out of like 6 months out of their businesses or quit a career. So yeah, so great. I'm really pleased we've had this conversation, and thank you for sharing. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you for brand strategies, how do they contact you the best?
Yeah, so my branding studio is called White River Design, and you can find us on the internet, whiteriverdesign.com. We're also on social media, but the best way is probably through our website, because you can also check out our work and see the kind of stuff that we do there as well. So thank you for that.
No, thank you very much for chatting with me, Debbie, and I look forward to catching up with you again in person soon.
Absolutely.